Second video here on the NDIS application processes. Now, just to clarify one point from the previous discussion, we looked up the NDIS access request form, and it is specific to the early eligibility assessment for participation in the scheme itself. So it is a precursor to, a prerequisite to really looking at animal-assisted therapy funding. I think that to simplify things, you really need to focus on one, get a person onto the NDIS as a participant, and then look at animal-assisted therapy assessment and treatment planning and funding application processes. So these steps, assessment and treatment planning, are contingent on the funding, but they also need to happen before or during the funding application processes so that the funding is then generated. And you could look at this as a cyclical process, actually. A person gets on the scheme, they receive their core funding, they look at raising the issue of animal-assisted therapy in their planning process, which can happen from the earliest stage as they're putting in their criteria for their access request to get the NDIS provision in the first place. Animal-assisted therapy work could be part of the goals of that review, that very early and first review, where it's more likely that you'll have a planning meeting with a planner. Once you're on the scheme, then subsequent annual plan reviews may or may not involve detailed meetings or actual dialogue about what will be in the next plan. You would be more likely to be putting in documentation, therapy reviews, reports, your assessments from your support coordinator, your local area coordinator. They would be writing notes that would go towards your review by the NDIS planner and subsequent reviews. So simplify. Eligibility, get yourself on the NDIS, then look at raising the goal within your plan. That pays for your early assessments. The early assessments are critical and important to defining the need for animal-assisted therapy. Then you get that funding. That following year, you engage in all of the assessments. You put together the file, the portfolio that supports animal-assisted work. And then the following year, you may get funding to actually engage in animal-assisted therapy work. This process of applying for the NDIS, doing your initial year of assessments, may or may not take 1 or 2 years before you actually get your funding for animal-assisted therapy work. This is a long-term goal. This is not something that you can do overnight. It's not something that you can prepare for overnight either, because once you have that funding to engage in animal-assisted therapy work, you need to be careful about how you do it. It needs to be well planned and thought out. Another dozen steps involved in the process. When applying for NDIS funding for animal-assisted therapy work, specifically using an autism assistance dog as an example, for a person with complex psychosocial needs and cognitive needs, could be related to intellectual disability, for example. The process involves a detailed assessment and planning process. Here are 12 steps involved that look at and focus on behavior support, therapy assessment, and treatment planning. The first step is initial needs assessment. Conduct a comprehensive assessment of the individual's psychosocial and cognitive needs. This may involve input from a psychologist, therapist, behavior specialist, or other relevant professional. Under NDIS funding, like I've said, if you have the goals set up in the plan, you would have funding for a behavior specialist provision. You would then seek out that behavior specialist and they would provide assessments. Okay. You need to identify autism assistance dog requirements as step 2, based on the individual's challenges and goals. This needs to come from their clinical assessment So there needs to be a level of functional assessment involved. Their functional capacity needs to be looked at in all of the various domains, and it needs to be looked at in a specific way. How could an autism assistance dog help the individual in their situation? Document specific behaviors of concern and difficulties that the individual has that the dog could potentially help with or could address, such as anxiety reduction, social interaction facilitation, or sensory support. Sleep management is another big area. An autism assistance dog is a rather particular, specific terminology that we're using, and we need to define this early on. The autism assistance dog is a formally trained dog, like a guide dog for a blind person. Like with the guide dog, the autism assistance dog is trained over a lengthy period of time. When matching the dog to the individual, the dog is also trained to the specific needs, dispositions, personality, etc. of the individual. The dog needs to be trained to the specific individual's needs and also to the family context. Each of the handlers, and a handler is a specific terminology as well within this area. The handler of the dog is a formal role that needs to involve training. The individual goes through a training process and they need to be vetted. They need to be assessed by the animal trainers to be deemed proficient as a dog handler, And this is a formal process. At various stages in this planning, the animal assistance specialist needs to match the dog to the individual. In this case, we're looking at a child with autism. That matching needs to take place. The relationship needs to be started. The dog will be trained for the specific needs of the individual, which means that the animal handlers, the specialists, will do assessments of the child, or if it's an adult, they'll do specialist assessments, and they'll create a list of criteria to teach the dog various ways of interacting that will prepare them for working with the individual. Also, the handlers may be one of the parents in the home. Sometimes they might train both parents if there's two. If the dog is going to be used within a school environment, they'll also need to train one of the teacher's assistants or the teacher to be the dog handler as well. Probably unlikely to be the teacher in most situations because teachers these days tend to be fairly overwhelmed by large classrooms, and they would probably not have the capacity and attention to be able to give to an autism assistance dog in the classroom. So it would be a teacher's assistant that would be trained as an animal handler. The third step is engagement with professionals. Collaborate with healthcare professionals, including behavior specialists, psychologists, and occupational therapists, to gather supporting documentation that highlights the potential benefits of an autism assistance dog in the individual's therapeutic plan. We're talking about a lot of different plans here. We've got the NDIS funding plan. We have a therapeutic plan for autism assistance dog provisions. And very likely we're going to have developed a behavior support plan that a behavior specialist under the NDIS will generate for the individual, and within which the autism assistance dog activities and implementation of behavior support will be included as steps and as suggestions and strategies that are worked out with the family. And if there's disability staff involved, they will also be involved in implementing the behavior support plan. Again, handling of the dog is always restricted to the person or people that are trained as handlers. If the child, for example, has disability support workers, it's highly unlikely that people on that team will be trained as animal handlers. It's more likely that one of the parents or people that will be very likely to be there, stable in the environment over a period of years, will be the animal handlers because it's very costly to train people in these roles, and they need to be consistent. There needs to be an absolute consistency for the dog and for the child in this case over months and years. This is not a short-term intervention. We're talking about a fairly lengthy process over several years. The fourth step is to select the autism assistance dog provider. In some sense, we've already done that. The family and the people involved in supporting the individual within the NDIS services need to have engaged with the autism assistance dog provider. You need to look at a reputable and stable NDIS registered specialized assistance dog provision. So the organization has to have some level of awareness and training and capacity to support a child with autism for a specifically trained dog to function in this very specialist environment. Ensure the provider has experience working with individuals who have complex psychosocial and developmental needs, as well as cognitive needs. The fifth step is assessment by the autism assistance dog provider. The selected provider should conduct a thorough assessment to match the individual with the suitable assistance dog. So this matching process we've already discussed. This involves considering the person's temperament, preferences, and specific therapeutic needs. At this level, I have to say that the behavior support documentation, early functional assessment reports, and possibly an early draft of the behavior support plan could be provided to the animal assistance dog provider. This would give them a more detailed picture and perspective on what the needs of the individual are, what their risks and vulnerabilities are, and how to address those, both for the safety of the child and for the safety of the dog. Documentation for NDIS application is step 6, and this is another level of complexity. Prepare a comprehensive application for NDIS funding that includes detailed documentation from the professionals supporting the need for an autism assistance dog, including the assessments reports and letters of recommendation. Number 7 is the behavior support plan. Develop a behavior support plan that integrates the autism assistance dog into the individual's daily life and therapeutic activities. This plan should outline specific goals, strategies, and methods, and measurable outcomes related to the use of the assistance dog. Number 8, incorporation into the support plan. During the planning meeting with the NDIS, you need to discuss the behavior support plan and the role of the autism assistance dog. Clearly articulate how the dog will contribute to achieving the individual's goals and improving overall well-being. So here, incorporating into the NDIS funding support plan is an integral aspect to weave the work that's been done into subsequent planning and funding. 9 is training and integration. Work closely with the assistance dog provider to ensure proper training and integration of the dog into the individual's routine. This may involve training for the individual and their support network to maximize the benefits of the assistance dog. Number 10 is ongoing monitoring and evaluation, reporting. Regularly monitor the effectiveness of the autism assistance dog in addressing the individual's need. Maintain detailed records of behavioral challenges, achievements, and any challenges that are faced during the integration process. Number 11 is communicate with the NDIS. Maintain open communication with the NDIS, providing updates on progress and any adjustments that are needed to the support plan. This ongoing dialogue helps ensure that the therapy remains effective. We don't know actually how practically effective this step would be. Ideally, it sounds wonderful, but as a principle, it's great. But in reality, we all seem to be providing the NDIS a heap of information that doesn't necessarily translate into proactive changes to an individual's NDIS plan funding. Review and adjustment is the last step of our new baker's dozen. Periodically review the behavior support plan and the assistance dog's role, making adjustments as needed to address evolving needs and goals. By following these detailed steps and collaborating with professionals and NDIS reps, you can create a comprehensive plan for incorporating an autism assistance dog into behavior support therapy for an individual with complex psychosocial, cognitive, and developmental needs. Wow, there's a lot of detail in there to unpack. Thank you for listening.